Hello and welcome to the Emotion Code. We are all set to dive in, and thank you for being here, or if not, thank you for watching the recording. So I'm going to just start with a bit of an introduction. If you are here because you have joined Matriarchs by Design, this is really just the first course in what will be a 6-course experience. So the intention of today's masterclass is not to go into the full depth of the solar plexus and emotional authority, because it's a little bit of an intro. We'll be going into the more interesting stuff, which is the mutation that will be happening within the solar plexus from 2027 and what that is going to mean for the solar plexus function and of course for all the rest of us. So if you are just here for this workshop, masterclass, I highly recommend that you come and join us at least for the mutation session, which will be happening in a few weeks. So here we go, let's dive straight in and we'll get into a slide presentation as well. I'll just share my screen so that you can see the slides. Okay, so let's dive in with the emotion code. Now, why have I called this the emotion code? Because really our solar plexus definition or openness, it's coded within us. It's part of our blueprint through our human design from when we are born. And we are essentially binary. We are either one or the other. And all of the centers are like this, but the solar plexus, as you will see through this presentation, it is really a big driver, a huge lever in the emotional tone of the entire planet. So this particular masterclass is really for everybody, because if you are not an emotional authority, you have someone in your life that is. We are naturally attracted to each other. This may not be in the form of a romantic partner. This can be a parent-child relationship. This can be work colleagues. Any time that humans are coming together, emotions are involved because we are naturally emotional creatures. So whether you are defined or open, this masterclass, you are going to get really tangible benefit from receiving. And we're going to talk about the polarity as well, which is really important because this is when we come together, and how it is making and breaking our lives and relationships. So let's dive in. Okay, the solar plexus. So if you are quite new to design and the body graph is still a little bit of a foreign entity to you, the solar plexus is down here. This is actually my chart. For confidentiality reasons, there's not many charts I can use, so I use my own, and that's perfectly fine. I have nothing to hide. So because the solar plexus here is colored in, it means that I have solar plexus definition. Now, if you have solar plexus definition, you are an emotional authority. It's actually very, very simple. And this includes no matter what aura type you are, no matter what energy type you are, this solar plexus definition, if it's there, you are emotion. You are an emotional being, you are emotionally defined. We are all a feeling species. We are on an emotional planet. And the really interesting part of this is that the emotional authorities, which comprise about 51% of the population, we are essentially responsible for setting the emotional tone of the planet. This sounds like a huge responsibility, and it really is. 49% of us, the other half that are undefined in this center, they are essentially riding the wave that we are generating. So it sounds like we need to therefore control and moderate that wave, but we cannot. It is not possible. I'll get to that by the end of the masterclass today, but it's not about controlling the wave. The waves are mechanical in the same way within the body that a biochemical reaction happens, a hormonal cascade happens. It is completely unconscious, it is completely automated, it is mechanical. It's the best description that I can give it. And whereas humans, we get really kind of stuck is when we don't understand as an emotional authority that our wave has this mechanical internal nature to it, and we want to attach stories to the sensations that we're feeling rather than just understanding, oh, this is a chemical cascade within my body. And so instead we go, I'm feeling this way because of him. I'm feeling this way because that didn't happen or that did happen. And that piece alone, when we can start to break down that false belief, that false pattern, that false behavior, that's the first step. Emotional authorities are then going to come into their own experience with more authenticity, more awareness, and more self-responsibility. From that place, you can start observing the wave. So we hear this all the time: emotion, energy in motion. I love this because this is outside human design world as well, and it is very, very true. We have all as humans experienced that forceful power that emotion can give, good and bad. You know, when it's really high, you can just do incredible things off that energy that the emotional experience can produce. But when it's in a negative, a low, it can also have a hugely detrimental effect. And so this idea of it being a wave really makes you sit back and realize that it's always changing. It's in constant flux and flow. And this is where in human design, Ra introduced this really key mantra for emotional authorities: there is no truth in the now, because this is a snapshot of your wave, and the wave is in flow. It is fluid, it is moving. I'm going to go into the different types of emotional waves. So this is really in the beginning for emotional authorities, but if you have an emotional authority in your life, you may be able to identify what kind of wave they have. The circuitry is involved in all of this. Now, what is the solar plexus center? It's very, very complex, and we're going to be going into this a bit more in the mutation masterclass that will be coming up. But the solar plexus center is our center of what is our sexuality. It's our feel good in the physical sense. It's all about food, sex, desire. Now, it's a big misconception because a lot of people out there believe that that's sacral. Now, in human design, sacral, yes, is creative energy. It's the life force energy, but that's not necessarily sensuality in that sense. So it's all about food, enjoyment, all the good stuff in life, and experiencing the full spectrum of that world. It's beautiful stuff. And for undefined solar plexus centers, they love it. They love experiencing the fullness of the expression that emotional authorities get to have when it's good. When it's bad, that's where we come into the not self theme. Now, the not self theme of the solar plexus is avoid confrontation and truth. Now, don't trick yourself as an emotional authority. You can also have a not self theme. You can be conditioned in your solar plexus. Just because it's defined doesn't mean that you are not able to express a not self theme. This not self theme is a danger zone for whether you have a defined or undefined solar plexus. It is more of a tripping point for undefined solar plexuses because that space is literally white, it's open. So when you're undefined, the solar plexus here will be white. And when it's open, it's really here to take in from life. It's here to learn from life. And so it's more prone and more liable to kind of get into this not self theme because it's like a vulnerability, it's an openness there. Whereas definition, once you undo all the patterning and behaviors, you can actually unravel that not self theme much more quickly and sit back in your definition. Easier said than done when it comes to emotional authorities, which is one of the most challenging authorities to actually have because the emotional authority is not immediate. Emotions can feel very immediate, But because of this wave nature, we are not here to act on them in the moment. It is so important to allow the full amplitude of that wave to run its full course. That's why we say there's no truth in the now. So it's a very interesting reflection point, because if you look again at these numbers here, where we're talking about, over half the planet is walking around as emotional authorities. Now that, in a sense, kind of trumps this idea of we're dominated by sacral energy. Sure, 70% of us are generators, that's that sacral drive walking around, but a large portion of them are emotional authorities. So that is actually the dominant background frequency of the planet. So let's dive into the 3 major types of emotional authorities. And you may, if you're an emotional authority, you may already know this, or this may be new information for you, but it's very useful because it's so important to understand the mechanics of your wave. So the types of emotional authority are essentially 3, and they run along with the circuitry types. So circuitry, there's a lot of terminology in human design. Just be patient if it's quite new for you. But circuitry is when we're talking about, we've got the body graph here, and this is like a blank body graph that I've actually put some graphics on. I apologize for the fairly low quality of this graphic. So this is actually showing that these individual channels, in this case, we've got the 2212, and this is the channel of openness. Sorry, my little dog's upstairs, and I'm like, what is that noise coming through my headphones? And we've got the channel of emoting, which is down here. He's going to come down and join us now. We've got the channel of emoting, which is down here. So this is individual circuitry, and what we're meaning with circuitry is these are channels. And when channels start to connect centers, we get circuitry. So depending on which channels are actually defined, that is what type of circuit it will be. And this is getting into a little bit more depth that's beyond the scope of this masterclass, so I'll try and kind of pull myself back in, which is not easy sometimes. So if you have either of these 2 channels and you're a defined solar plexus, then you have the individual type of wave. And let's go into what that actually feels like as an emotional authority with the individual waveform. So the mood swings, the amplitude is actually very sharp. It can be described as like a ratcheting type of waveform. So it can be very kind of changeable and abrupt and have this sharpness to it. This type, your type, if this is you, or this type is the most sensitive. So these are highly sensitive emotional beings. So the emotional world can be really quite heightened for these individuals. It's also all about falling in love and romanticism, which is very beautiful. It can cycle up and down repeatedly several times a day, or have this really, really slow mood that can go on for up to a whole week. So these types of waves in particular, you really need to get your sensation around so you can kind of understand, okay, this is actually a fairly fast moving amplitude, so your decision point as far as your authority will be a little bit sooner. So you may be able to make a decision within the day, or it may be 48 hours. If you've kind of delved into more of a mood, then you need to delay that decision even further. And this is a trial and error process. So even if you're not a third line, you will have a trial and error process with this. It is part of the learning curve of the deconditioning journey for an emotional authority. And it's not straightforward, it's not linear, but it's the only work really that's here for you to do in this life if you're an emotional authority, because this is the key to everything. If you can live according to your authority, everything else opens up for you and you'll have far less resistance in your life. So the other interesting part of this is this particular circuitry lends itself to a very auditory process. So you'll have this love of music, but also emotionally, these people will have this ability to really pick up on the subtleties within the non-verbal aspects of communication. So other things like kind of tone and nuance, they will be quite particular about how something was said more than the words that are being used. So this is a very interesting characteristic. And so they are also very, very sensitive to criticism, because anything that comes verbally is going to be quite heightened for these beings, whether that be music, sound. It's like an auditory sensitivity in particular. Now, with particular reference to the 3955, the channel of emoting, the gate 55 is a gate of deep melancholy. It's got a melancholy flavor to it. Now, this can be incredibly challenging for those people that have this, or more so when you're not aware that this is part of your mechanics. Now, this means that when you do have your lows, if you have that gate 55, your low can be quite low and quite drawn out, which is characteristic of this type of circuitry. It is really, really advisable to, as much as you can, to not try to escape that melancholy, but to really withdraw, retreat, spend time with yourself. It's all about nourishing and supporting your wave rather than blocking it, suppressing it, shortchanging it, trying to fix it, trying to state shift it. Those things with an emotional wave are really, really counterproductive, because your wave is your intuition. You want it to be able to run its course in a healthy way. And in this example, that means removing yourself from other humans, because we don't want to have to control this. It's very, very important that you don't control and suppress your waves. And we'll go into this in a couple of slides. So the highs are beautiful. This is a very sensual emotion. It's all about romance and flirting, not just with other people, but with life. These individuals have this romance with life and experience. It's very, very beautiful when you're in that high. But also, again, if you are this particular individual, you can go into very quickly making those decisions on those big romantic ideas and kind of jump into things that you haven't fully ridden your wave. So it's always about coming back to that, okay, I'm really excited, this feels so juicy and I'm running away with all of this sensation. Then come down, make sure you're at more of a neutral before you take that decision. And for all emotional authorities, we say you're only going to be about 80% sure by the time you land at that decision point. So allow all of that to flow through. Enjoy the juiciness when it's there. Self-isolate if you go into that low, and allow it to run its course, and make sure you're in that neutral again before you decide. Again, and I'll say this for all emotional authorities, one thing that gets lost a little bit in the weeds with respect to emotional authorities is you do not have to do this process for every single decision of your life. Like, am I going to have a muffin at the cafe today? No, it's not that crucial, because your life will start to get very slow otherwise. This is really for about the big things, the big opportunities. It's about experiences, people, like who you're around. Trust your emotional authority with deciding who you want to spend time with, who you want to relate with, places, environments, jobs, all of those sorts of things, homes, your environment, those sorts of things. It's not like small day-to-day, what am I having for lunch type of thing. Don't get too hung up on it. All right. The next type, the second type of emotional wave, is the collective wave. And these are the channel 4130, which is the channel of recognition. And that's down here, connecting the solar plexus and the root center. And we've got the 3536, which is the channel of transience. And this is connecting our solar plexus with our throat. So you'll have one or the other of these channels. You will not have both. This is just a graphical representation that I've created to just show where these channels actually are. Now, this is a really interesting wave. I'm glad that I don't have this wave, because I already feel like my waveforms are very unpredictable, but this is the most unpredictable. And collective circuitry is also called abstract, because it's it's abstract in its form. So when you have it as your emotional language, it takes on that characteristic as well. So this is all about expectations, fantasies, hopes and dreams. It's really about being out there with the fairies. And when I was preparing these slides, I was thinking, wow, it must be such a sad moment if, for example, there is a child that has this particular circuitry. And in childhood, all children have that propensity for fantasy and play and, really not living in the real world, and the creativity that comes from that. And that's the special gift of these particular individuals. And at some point, for so many of those children, they're told it's time to grow up, that fairies aren't real, that this isn't real, that you can't express those parts of yourself anymore. And this is where I really love the wisdom within human design, because what is happening in those moments is you're disconnecting someone from their zone of genius. You're disconnecting them from their path in life, from their authenticity, from their alignment of being truly themselves and their natural capabilities. And then after that, life just becomes hard because we are all trying to fit into those boxes. And particularly this type of individual, you can imagine that if this is disconnected in a really dysfunctional way, that can have a really dysfunctional outcome for the rest of their lives, because they are always going to be suppressing this. And I love to think of a brave new world where we understand the mechanics and the depth of uniqueness within human design, and all of these attributes can be allowed to fully develop, and everyone is in their natural zone of genius. And that's the utopia of the future, the big dream. So these individuals are very highly creative and they're highly visual. And so this means that they really need to be out in the world getting a lot of visual stimuli, but also in their internal world, receiving so much input about imagery and fantasy. And that is really important for their process. Now, the interesting part about all this being collective in the circuitry is the energy is directed at society. So society and circumstances in a low, dysfunctional kind of vibration of this wave frequency, they will kind of project blame on others and on society for anything that might be going on, for how they might be feeling. So I kind of look at this and think this must really be some of the great people that are like protesting, that are very politically active, that get very charged about global issues. This potentially could be their circuitry. This would lend itself really, really well. And because they're able to project out the collective experience in all of that and see where those issues are, that can be a nice outlet for them, I guess, as well. The third and final is tribal. And so tribal is going back to our ancestral roots. It's really, most of this machinery within us is going back to the 7-centered version of our vehicle, which is pre-1781. So a lot of this is super, super primal stuff. Now, there are 3 tribal channels that are possible within an emotional authority, and this is the 4919, which is the channel of synthesis. That's down here, solar plexus to root. We have the 659, which is the channel of intimacy. And interestingly, this connects our very emotional sexuality with our creative desire to procreate in the sacral center, the 659. And then we have the 3740, and this is the channel of community. And this is connecting our solar plexus with our ego, will, or heart center, whatever you want to particularly use. All those terms are thrown around out there in human design land. So this is the most primal. And so it's very interesting. These waves can have very short amplitudes when they're in their natural expression. So even 10 to 15 minutes. So these people are emotionally volatile. They will have the extremes. And so they might get really, really angry about something, but it will come out. There will be an outlet if it's healthily expressed, and it will be over. The problem is they leave this emotional hangover behind them. So that's where this emotional intelligence comes in for this type in particular. Because we're going back to this kind of primal energy and this primal way of being, if you can kind of imagine that, this is all about cruelty, violence, survival instincts, but it's also about sex and tenderness. And so it's very primal, to use the word again. The important thing about this type is that they are all about the body. You know, you think about, again, this idea of primal. This is about survival instincts. This is about being very much kind of in the body, not like in the mind. And so these people, it's so important that they have some degree of expression of the energy in motion of their emotional waves through the body, preferably in a healthy way, and that they find ways to do that. They also have this desire, because it's tribal, it's not about the individual. This is not just about them sitting in their own experience. They really want to connect this experience with others, but not the collective, with an intimate other. So it's very much about a very, very small inner circle, this tribal concept. This is the most aggressive of the emotional waves. Now, aggressive doesn't always have to mean violent. It's just meaning that it's a very, very strong, powerful force, provided it's not dysfunctional and it's kind of healthy and functional. But it's the most likely to move into kind of aggression, whereas when we were looking before at the individual channels, there was more of that melancholy sensation. This one is more of an aggressive, angry, rage kind of low. In the highs, which are of course delightful, it's all about passion, heat, sexual excitement. So these people, I will raise my hand as one of them, can be described as being too passionate. This has been used for me before, which was not conducive in a hospital environment to be too passionate. And fortunately, I ended up in a profession where I was putting people to sleep. So I just kind of had to behave myself while the patients were conscious. And then once my patient was unconscious, it was great. I could kind of be myself in the operating theatre, and most days that was really well received by my colleagues. I had an ability to really set the emotional tone of the theatre, but when my emotions were off, everybody felt it. Like, we were either going to have a great day, like, oh, Ann-Maree, we're so glad we're working with you today. But if it wasn't going well, it was a funk. It was a real funk. And I can look back and see this now because I didn't know this at the time. Now, active expression, movement of this wave, movement of the physical body to process these waves is absolutely key. And this information was very late in arriving to me. And it makes sense, particularly with respect to the 4919, because it's got this connection to the root center, which is another motor. The solar plexus is a motor. That's why we say energy in motion. It's a very, very powerful force. Interestingly here, we also have a motor, the sacral center. This is why it needs to be moved through the body. Interesting, there's no mistakes in the mechanics. The mechanics tell us everything. Here we have the will center, the will power. This is another motor, often used and abused and burnt out for those that don't have sacral definition. Ra is a fantastic example of this. Ra was driven, he was a manifester, so he did not have sacral definition. He did not have solar plexus definition. I don't believe he had root definition, but I can't recall off the top of my head now. But he certainly had willpower. He certainly had a defined will, a defined ego. Thank goodness, because that he was designed to bring the knowledge forward for human design to kind of come into the world. That being said, with a defined will center, sometimes that is leveraged too much and you overwork it, you over push through that center. And ironically, also being a lifetime smoker, Ra died of a heart attack. He literally completely extinguished this motor because it was so overused. And he knew design, but he also had a greater purpose and a greater vision to bring this knowledge into the world. And he probably worked really hard at that, and his vehicle was compromised as a result. Anyway, that's an aside. So it's all about physicality with this particular emotional wave. So active expression, sport, particularly more kind of competitive sports, but I was reading emotional sports like soccer or football, as we would say here in Europe. And it's like, yeah, you can see like the European energy and passion, particularly in Italy around something like soccer, great outlet. Very tribal. You see, if you know anything about football in Europe, it's really all about this, you back your team and there's this passion, and it's very, very tribal and primal, and it can be very, very aggressive. People get banned from stadiums. You can kind of see this energy out there as well, not just in individuals. And so these people will be really attracted to that as an outlet for them, sometimes with disastrous consequences. Dancing, sex, these are all great outlets, provided they're expressed in a healthy way, of course. It's very, very creative. All the emotional types are creative, really, because emotions are the source of creativity. You think about most of the amazing things created in our world, they've come through emotions. They're expressions of human emotion. But tactile is very important. These are very, very tactile body people. I think I've kind of said that enough. The lows are pretty grim. This can be a very, very destructive form of aggression. Now, if that outlet is not there, this can be internally destructive. Think about the body, think about disease, think about stress and suppression of emotions and how that starts to grow tumors and really undermine the nervous system. And so the health aspects of these individuals, if they don't understand their emotional wave and they aren't nourishing and serving their wave, they can break down this vehicle very, very rapidly, and it's totally avoidable. That's the incredible thing. Also, rage benefits from a physical outlet. So for example, these people, when they're having that huge surge of rage going through, let it out. Yell, preferably not at another human with an open solar plexus, which we'll talk about shortly, but yell, punch pillows, like have a physical way of expressing that. As a society, we've kind of said that any kind of aggressive expression is violence and that all violence is bad, but it is part of the spectrum of human emotion. So we need to take responsibility for having an expression of that allows it to move, that it's not getting bottled up and then coming out in a really dysfunctional way, and even worse, impacting others outside of us. Okay. So where does this all come together? We've just talked about the emotional authorities and that very individual, whether it's individual, tribal, or collective, it's an individual process. You are the vehicle containing your wave. This wave is happening in you. It's not about something outside. It's not about this, anything that happened in that day. It's not about that person. It is a mechanical, chemical process that's happening in you, which we've talked about. This is the fun bit though. We have auras. We emit energy beyond this physical body. And this is a big part of human design. All of the so-called types that we talk about, the generator, the manifestor, the projector, and the reflector, and I will say very clearly, in my world, in source material world, in Ra's world, there are only 4 types. If anyone out there is telling you that there is 5 and that many gens are a separate energy type, it is incorrect. They are a subtype of generators. And this is because your type, your energy type, is actually an aura type. It is the type of aura that you have. And the generator and manifesting generator, their aura is the same. They both have this enveloping aura. They are the same type. Now, projector, for example, has this penetrating aura. So it's all about the aura type. So with polarity, this is when we're all kind of energetically, aurically rubbing up against each other out in the world. And so it's not just our energy type. If you think that your aura, for whatever energy type you are, has got this emotional flavor to it, if you're defined emotional authority, if you've got a defined solar plexus, your aura's got a particular flavor or smell or feeling to another person, particularly the ones that have an open solar plexus. They are going to be very heightened to you and your emotional definition, whatever it happens to be in that moment. So there is this really natural attraction. It's like moth to the flame. And this is an important part and a natural part of our biological mechanics as well. For survival of our species, for evolution of our species, it has always been so important to diversify the gene pool. So we joke about this, you know, in our culture and say, well, opposites attract, but it is a real phenomenon biologically. We cannot help it. You might think you're consciously attracted to something that is not you, but biologically we're being driven there as well. And the same thing is happening when you have a defined solar plexus and an open solar plexus. They are like a lock and key. So why this is so interesting is because in romantic relationships, which arise from attraction, whatever type of attraction that may be, hopefully all the types of attraction is ideal, very, very often you will find in a romantic partnership, one person will have a defined solar plexus and one person will have an open solar plexus because they really want to be with each other because the other one has something that they don't have, so it's very attractive. And I'm not saying all relationships are like that, but it's definitely very common to find this phenomenon. So how do we deal with it? Because it's beautiful, but then when we are in the not self theme, either of us, it is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for fireworks. It's a recipe for incredibly beautiful, profound, like life-altering emotional exchanges and experiences together in the highs, but in the lows, it can be disastrous. And it can actually break up what is otherwise a really, really healthy union because of all of our baggage to do with emotions and how we've kind of been conditioned or raised and what we bring into the relationship. So the undefined solar plexus, its MO is avoid confrontation, avoid truth, reveal nothing. It's a real avoidance kind of attachment style, which eventually leads to lies and manipulation as techniques and strategies to avoid that confrontation, to avoid that connection. Now, for an emotional authority who is quite used to having emotional frequencies rolling through their system, like it's normal for us, and it's very hard for us to understand someone that is undefined, that the volume of emotions will be really heightened for them. It's like, it feels very chaotic for them. Whereas for us, it's just our vibe. Like we're kind of used to it in a way. It's normal. It's part of our mechanics. But for those that are undefined, it's chaos. And so what tends to happen is, as a survival mechanism, they want to avoid that chaos. It feels unsafe. We are all seeking safety and certainty. And for an undefined solar plexus who is with a particularly volatile or unconscious emotional authority, look at some of those waveforms and what they're like. That undefined solar plexus is picking up on that, and the nature of definition with an undefined center, the undefined center amplifies. They will amplify the definition in the other around 200%. So what your wave might be feeling like for you, if you are in proximity, aura, with another human that is undefined, they're going to be feeling your shit. The good stuff and the bad stuff, and they might want to get the hell out of there or really have a lot of trouble dealing with it. So when these undefined solar plexus beings cannot avoid confrontation, and this is what can happen with emotional authorities, we want to get in there and have those deep and meaningful discussions. We want to know how you're feeling. We want to talk it out. They don't want that. So when you're kind of cornering them into that situation, all hell breaks loose, because these people are the most explosive beings on the planet when they're unconscious, when they're unaware, because they literally go into a fight, flight, it could be fight, flight, freeze, it could be all of it, mechanism, because they go into survival mode. That's what we do. That's our hard wiring. So if you think 49% of humanity are doing that every single day of their lives. The undefined solar plexuses are just in avoidant mode, and we've got emotional authorities who want to share this richness of their experience with people that do not understand that language. You can see that we've got a lot of disconnect, and that can be so resolved. It's so resolvable for more harmonious relationships. And this is where I feel the biggest opportunity is in the, emotional landscape of human design, and therefore out there in the rest of the world, for all of us to have a nicer time of it. So relationships are emotional. It is completely it's unavoidable. You can even think, oh, well, with my work colleagues, there shouldn't be any emotions there. Of course there are. You're unconsciously judging someone the minute that you're meeting them. You're picking up on their aura. You're attaching stories, beliefs, previous experiences to, oh, I felt this before, and what did it mean then? And we cannot help it. It's our human way. And so what we tend to do is we tend to go into the mind and kind of suppress and ignore the emotions, which for an emotional authority is very, very dysfunctional, because that's your intuition. You need that. You need that information. So again, just be aware that the mechanics are getting amplified 200%. Now, a really interesting example of this, I'll just tell a little bit of a story. This is Ra's story, actually, and Ra has been able to really give some beautiful insight on emotional authorities. Not because he is one, but because of his openness. This is where he's gone to school in life. And he ran into a lot of issues. He was married 3 times because of his open solar plexus. So he really went to school in life through his openness, and he owns it. He was very, very avoidant. He was very manipulative. He would lie quite easily. This was his ability to deal with having an open solar plexus and his adaptation to that. And this is the beautiful thing. You don't even need to know human design. This is going to go on. But when you know human design and you can pour awareness and wisdom into this, that is when life is just so much more easeful and beautiful. So he was driving in Europe with a colleague. They were doing a work trip and they were in Germany. And essentially his colleague was driving, Ra was a passenger, and they took a wrong turn and they got a little bit lost. And the colleague was a defined solar plexus, so an emotional authority, and got really, really pissed off. Now, potentially could have had a tribal, could have had that really quick turn of aggression and rage as part of their wave. But Ra was able, because they were in the car, they were in close proximity, feeling that aura, feeling that amplification, Ra could really feel this guy was pissed off. And it took 2 hours for that wave to stabilize. 2 hours. Now you think about that for an emotional authority. You really need to, you can't shortchange that process. But for someone else having to sit in that with you, that's really uncomfortable. So this is where responsibility comes in. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. And just keep an eye on my time. So we've got a real dilemma here, because a lot of emotional authorities may have been programmed when they were younger to suppress their wave. We talked about that collective circuitry earlier, of that real fantasy type of experience in a child that might really just run away with the fairies and be told by an adult, by age 10, okay, you can't really behave like that anymore, like you need to stop that, and the suppression starts to happen. So suppression of an emotional wave is extremely unhealthy, and you're essentially blocking your intuition. One thing I just want to quickly make mention of here, because we are in a masterclass environment, and I want to give you some pieces that may not normally be paired with these topics in particular. Another aspect of mechanics is our definition. Now, you can be a single definition, you can be a split definition. Within the splits, you can have a simple split, you can have a triple split, you can have a quadruple split. Now, all this means is it's going back to that circuitry. So our channels within the body graph You might have a channel between the ajna and the throat, for example. You've got one channel there, and then you've got another channel, for example, let's say the 4919, down in the solar plexus to the root. There's a big gap between those two channels. So they are circuits, but you've got a split. And that is an example of what we would call a wide split. Doesn't matter what your split is, but the more distance there is between those channels, the wider it will be. A triple split, for example, you might have 3 channels, but they're all separated. There's nothing connecting them. What does connect them is what we call a bridge. And this is when we look at the gates individually. And if you look at a body graph and you can see where the gaps are, you're like, well, if that gate was defined, that would then connect that circuit. Oh, so it's a bridge. Now, bridges are created by 2 things: other human beings or the planetary transits. So there's always this variability happening. But if you are a split definition, you are always, without those bridges, feeling incomplete. Very sadly, for 49% of the population with these splits, they are walking around looking for that completion. They are always feeling a bit incomplete because the circuitry is disconnected. They are looking for that bridge. And so when they find that bridge in a relationship, for example, these beings are very, very prone to codependency. And just knowing this is so powerful, because you can sit back as a split definition and not bring that into your relationship in the sense that I feel incomplete when I'm with that person, but you know what? That's okay. That's your mechanics. So this is just an extra aside because we're talking about relationships and the complexity. It goes even deeper than just solar plexus because that happens to be the emotional center. There's a lot more to it, but this is something I just wanted to quickly bring into this particular masterclass. So think about all the types of relationships, all of these different polarities with a defined or undefined solar plexus that can happen. This is parent-child, work colleagues, family members, friendships. All of this is going to come into play. And so maybe after this masterclass, you'll want to find out what other people in your lives are, maybe what your siblings are, so you can kind of see that interplay. For me personally, it was incredibly powerful and healing for me to run my mother's chart and see that she has an open solar plexus. And with my defined solar plexus, no wonder. I was like her best friend. She loved being in my emotional world. And there was a lot of other aspects to do with our mechanics that were quite interesting. But, you know, it was when I saw that in the mechanics, it was played out in life as well. I could definitely see that. So it's really useful to have this information. So what's the message? What's the takeaway? What are we going to do with all of this? Because I always, as my 5th line, unconscious 5th line, my body 5th line, there is this flavor of universalization. So yes, in my work with human design, it's so important that we embrace and fully develop our uniqueness, but we need to universalize concepts because we're all in the world together. So it's really important that we go, okay, well, what can we do with this that is practical and that actually universalizes and brings us a little bit closer into compassion for each other and makes a more harmonious world, which for emotional beings is so important, and that's all of us. Now, I'm going to be a bit potentially controversial here, and I'm going to take self-responsibility and ownership as an emotional authority. It is my sensation that we hold the responsibility in this dynamic. I've seen this play out in my personal life, in my intimate relationship, understanding my emotional wave and the characteristic of my circuitry with my undefined solar plexus partner and all of his not self themes that are running through his solar plexus, the stories, the traumas, the wounding. My ability to see that and pour awareness and knowledge into that. Yes, I'm a projector, so I could see that in him easier maybe than other types. But once you know, you know. If you've got a partner and you see they've got an open solar plexus, they're probably going to have the same stories of avoidance, not wanting to kind of get into these very intimate discussions and depth and avoiding all of that, avoiding confrontation, running away, unplugging. This is all undefined solar plexus behavior. So for us, the best thing that we can do first for ourselves, because without a healthy relationship with our wave, we're going to go nowhere. So we have to start with ourselves, with self-responsibility, with self-awareness, with self-experiment and exploration. If you do nothing else in your human design experiment as an emotional authority, pour all of your energy awareness into understanding your wave mechanics of your emotional internal process. This will get you 99.99% into less resistance in your life, and even more importantly, your authority is going to work for you. This is our authority. Our emotional authority is how we make decisions. So your strategy is part of it. That's to do with your energy type, of course. That's how invitations, how stimuli may come to you in your life. That's your strategy. But your authority is when you're saying yes or no. And so you really need to first and foremost understand your process, honor your process, respect your process, stop suppressing your wave, detach, detangle all the stories, all the collective homogenized beliefs that we have about aggression is bad, this is good, this is bad. Detangle all of that. It's mechanics. These are chemical cascades within your body. Let's neutralize all of that. And it's so important to give your wave what your wave needs. Now, this can be very challenging in the world because we do not live in a world where emotional authorities are catered to. We live in a world where it's very yes, no, black, white, structured, and that's not the emotional wave. It is a wave for that reason. It's got an organic structure. It's got varying amplitudes and time frames, and the way the world has been built doesn't really allow for that. So you have to stand up on that pedestal and say, this is what I'm saying yes to, this is what I'm saying no to. And the most powerful piece is, this is what I'm saying, wait, I'll get back to you. That's the best thing that you can do, is just create that time for yourself. If someone's giving you an invitation or offering something, a job offer, put that boundary in place. And you know what? If it's meant for you, you'll be supported in that. So don't think, oh, I need to say yes now because, you know, they're putting this timeline on. If that job is for you, that time frame of I'll get back to you in a couple of days will work. That's the beautiful thing about trusting life, trusting the process, strategy and authority. You will be guided onto the correctness for you when you follow your authority. When you shortchange it, when you go, oh, I can be an emotional authority related to this decision on going on a vacation with friends, but when it comes to my professional life, I need to act like a sacral or splenic authority and give them immediate answers. It doesn't work that way. If you're an emotional authority, 100%, 100%, you have to be an emotional authority in all aspects, and it does take time. So this is where most of the work needs to be put. Now, no truth in the now. Ride your wave, find that neutrality. That's where it's important to go, okay, let's create a gap here. Now, the wave is your zone of genius. Your emotional landscape is your zone of genius. It's going to give you all of those answers when you need them, but in the right timing of receiving those answers. And so it's very important that you are responsible for what is happening in your emotional landscape in any given moment. So if you are around, you don't need to know if they've got an undefined solar plexus. If you're around anybody, if you need to take a doona day because you are in a low melancholy, you do that. And it should be allowed for. I would love to dream about a future where in workplaces we have emotional authority leave. You know, you get to take an emotional day. Right now we call them sick days. What a dysfunctional relationship we create with emotions. Like, I'm not feeling it today, so I have to take a sick day. You're not sick, you're respecting your emotional wave. So hopefully in the future, maybe. But that's where you have to take self-leadership and self-responsibility, and that's the key term if you take nothing else away in your journey as an emotional authority, the mantra, no truth in the now, and radical self-responsibility. Do not spew, vomit, eject your emotional amplitude on an undefined solar plexus. It is know better, be better, do better. They do not have the wisdom and the mechanics to navigate that. You do. Your body's designed for it, but they don't. So have the respect, have the awareness, have the consciousness, because with 51% of us, we are setting the emotional tone for the planet. That is a huge responsibility. And the last point that I've got on this slide, the final frontier in human consciousness and awareness, this is leading us into the mutation masterclass and where the solar plexus is going. So I like to think of this really as the emotion code finale. If you think of these pieces of classical music as symphony, a concerto, the final installment is called the finale. And that's where we are in our evolution as a species, and also beautifully with the solar plexus. It's the final frontier, the solar plexus mutation of 2027. We have gone everywhere we're going to go with developing this intellect and this mind. We are almost at that tipping point where it's gone too far. We have like created too much. We've got too clever for ourselves. Now we're sort of outsourcing it all to AI. Great, because it means now we can actually lean back into our humanness and have full emotional lives and all the beauty that that has and the beauty of the beingness. And that's where we're leading into for 2027 and the mutation in the solar plexus that's going to take us from this motor center to an awareness center. And so with that, I hope that you'll join me in the mutation class. But if you don't, stay tuned with my content. And you know, the future for us humans is beautiful and bright, and we've created so much to land in this moment, but it's now up to us what we decide that we want to do with it.